Hi, long time no see again. So, life happened again, and I was busy with a bunch of stuff. But all throughout this period of not posting anything, not writing anything, I've been thinking a lot about the last video in the series on being ourselves, and I felt I had a responsibility to you to finish the series. I know there's not a lot of people watching, and maybe you're gonna get bored after like 5 minutes. But even so, I do what I must, and hopefully it proves useful to the end. So this is the last video in a series on how to be ourselves, and it's more of a philosophical, psychological, religious sort of mixture of things, where we talked about things like being radically honest with ourselves as being one of the steps towards becoming ourselves and being ourselves. Now, what I want to talk about today is a piece of insight that I received a long time ago, and which I kept to heart to this day, and which I was surprised to find that it has a lot of grounding in the writings of church fathers, for example, and even psychologists. So, to give you a bit of context, a long time ago, maybe 6 years ago, something like that, I was going through a pretty difficult period in my life. It lasted for about, I think, 2 years, something like that. It was pretty intense. There were periods when I struggled to fall asleep and to stay asleep. I felt very anxious. It was just a mess. And I sought some therapists to help me with my issues. And in my case, I ended up deciding to work on things by myself, and this was in no small part due to a piece of insight that I received from one of the psychologists, one of the therapists that I went to. So the piece of insight that I want to share with you that I found very useful was this idea that we have in ourselves all that we need. And that's what I want to discuss over the next couple of minutes, like what it means that we have in ourselves all that we need. Because it's a very true statement. It's not just some, I don't know, pop psychology sort of thing. It's a piece of insight that you can glean, for example, from reading church fathers and even the Bible without any sort of explanations. So there's this idea in Christianity that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And if you read psychologists like Carl Jung, or if you read the church fathers, who Jung quoted a lot, of course, they talk about how our self, who we really are, who we truly are in our essence, that is the image of God in man. It's an image of infinite potential, if you want. It's an image that is maybe present in every human being, and in that respect, we're not so different from one another. We're a lot more similar and a lot more connected than we'd like to think, all because of this image that we are all made in, that we all share. And the idea of the church fathers, and even Jung would agree with this, is we are made like God. Our self is like God. And to the degree that we become ourselves, we manifest ourselves, we act like ourselves, then we become more like God, right? So we have the potential to become like God, and through our action, through our action, which helps us become ourselves, we become like God as well. And I say this thinking also of a quote by Clement of Alexandria. He was an early church father. He lived, I think, in the 2nd or 3rd century after Christ. And he has a series of books. I think they all fit together in one title called Pedagogus. It's a Latin term meaning teacher, something like that. And in the third book, in Pedagogus, Clement of Alexandria starts by saying that it seems to him that the most important goal is to become ourselves, because, and then he goes on to say uh, that the most important goal in becoming ourselves is to know ourselves, something like that. And then the actual quote that I want to reference is this: he who knows himself knows God, and knowing God, he will be made like God, not by requiring gold or expensive clothes, but by requiring as few things as possible and by doing good deeds. And that, I would say, captures the essence of being ourselves. It implies not being so attached to a lot of external outcomes and external things in order to be what we need to be and to go where we need to go in life. We, of course, we can rely on others and we can interact with them and relate to them. The purpose isn't to become isolated sort of beings, but rather to be connected to them and at the same time derive our energy from ourselves, derive what we need from ourselves. And the second part, of course, is, and this is more of my belief rather than a concrete statement of anything, but I honestly believe that when people truly act like themselves, when they truly become themselves, that's when they can do good, or at least do good deeds. That's probably a better way of putting it. And I that was probably one of the most powerful pieces of insight that I ever got. This idea that we have in ourselves all that we need, and how it all ties together to the realization that church fathers had, that we are made in the image of God, and that means that we should become ourselves to become more like God. That's amazing for me to think about, because we have this notion, probably many of us, maybe you too, that when we look at other people doing great things, like, I don't know, achieving great feats of athleticism, or being very kind towards others, or very generous, or achieving some sort of whatever we deem to be successful in the truest sense of the word, not like in a strictly I have money kind of sense, but in a general sense of being successful in life. When we look at those people, we think, well, they can do that. They're amazing. They were just born this way. They're like this different race, and I'm just this almost pathetic sort of creature that can't do anything right, and I'm just, my lot is to struggle and to suffer every day, and that's it. And they have it well, and I won't, and that's it. But if you really take to heart the insight by the church fathers that we are made in the image of God, we're not very different from those great people who accomplished great things. We have the same potential as they did. We also have the negative potential, I would say, that scoundrels and very vicious people have, where they commit a lot of unwise and foolish actions. We have the potential for both. Like, we're not just some sort of neutral lump of life. We have the potential to act this or that way. That's our free will in many ways, and it's actually very freeing in many ways, because that means we are, if you're struggling with something, if you're really having a hard time in life, you're not doomed to that. Your lot is not to stay in suffering. Your lot is to become like God. And that might imply a good amount of suffering along the way. I'm not questioning that. And you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to bear that suffering by yourself all the time. Like, sometimes you're by yourself, and that's necessary. But sometimes you're with other people, and that's okay too. And it's okay if therapy works for you. Good if it works. You can go to a therapist and try to work together with that someone else on the things that you struggle with, and maybe a priest too, and whatever you deem necessary. But the idea is to start taking steps towards becoming ourselves, because we have in ourselves all that we need. That's the realization that I want to reiterate, and hopefully it'll stick with you. We really do have in ourselves all that we need. And that can be scary because it forces us to give up the pretense that we can't do that, that we should struggle because that's us. That's not true. But in many ways, it's easier to struggle like that than to struggle in attempting to become better, because that might mean, I don't know, learning to have a healthy relationship to your wife or husband, right? Because you've been maybe bickering for God knows how long, and maybe you think that's your lot, but it's not. It's up to you to change things. Now, you don't not have to do it alone, like I said, but there's a lot more leeway, there's a lot more potential to change things for the better, to become ourselves, and to really have a positive impact on the world than we often give ourselves credit for, because we think we're like nothing, or um, like I said, it's a lot easier to think that we are less than we are, because to become ourselves is a really great effort. Sometimes there are days when just taking one step forward is hard as hell, like getting out of bed in the morning when you're just dreading the day and it's just one horrible day after the other. Taking that one step to get out of bed, that's maybe all that you can afford to do in that one day. But even so, that's one step further than if you stood in one place, because often when we stay in one place, when we don't progress, what happens is we don't just stay still, because life still goes on with or without us. And we grow old and we change, whether we like it or not. And often staying in one place means regressing, not just staying put. So, for example, what helped me, what was like one step forward in that period of 2 years when I really struggled with things, was after going to therapy and receiving that piece of insight, I decided, okay, so if I have in myself all that I need, I'm gonna do everything in my power to improve my life. And I'm either gonna get better or I'm gonna go to hell. And yeah, that was the decision that I made, to do the best that I can with the resources that I had to really make an effort to heal. And one thing that I did, and that this was one of the steps, I would make time about 1 hour, 2 hours in the morning, and I would go for a walk through a quiet neighborhood near where I lived. And I would make an effort, because I was sort of beset by all sorts of doubts and thoughts and anxieties, and they would keep me still. I would get stuck in like a mental story about what was going on with me. And what I would do is I would go for those walks, and the walks and my paying attention to what was going on around me as I walked, like uh, checking out the houses near that I passed by, or looking at the cars that were driving by, or listening to the dogs and cats, or watching the leaves fall from the trees, and so on and so forth. All those things helped me sort of get the story in my head going, because I was no longer just stuck in thinking about my thoughts and about my anxieties, because I was also moving forward physically and looking around and trying to take stock of things, being mindful in a way. And that helped me move forward. It was one step out of many that I had to take, and I'm still taking. Um, but it was an important step on a lifelong journey, because again, becoming ourselves is a lifelong journey. It's not something you arrive at and you're there and you're all of a sudden yourself and that's it. No, it's a constant effort, but one which reveals constantly where your real limits are, because often our limits are a product of what's going on in here. rather than us not actually being capable or having the ability or the energy or the strength or the what have you needed to do that. Sometimes we just need to get started and to start today and never stop. So yeah, that's what it means that we have in ourselves all that we need, and that's the end of of this series. Um, if you managed to reach all the way to the end of this video, thank you very much for listening, and I hope it proved useful. Hope there was something in it that helped you in some way. If you have questions or if you want to discuss anything, you can write in the comments, or you can write to me directly and we can talk. So yeah, thanks for listening and wish you the best of luck. See ya.